Now, let's talk about the COVID crisis, which many of us sort of thought was petering out, was on its last legs, but not if Nicola Sturgeon has her way. Let's have a listen to an announcement that not only depressed all of us, it must have seriously depressed those long-suffering Scots.
From next Monday, 21st March, with one temporary precautionary exception, the remaining domestic legal measures will be lifted and replaced with appropriate guidance. The exception relates to the requirement to wear face coverings on public transport and in certain indoor settings. Given the current spike in case numbers, we consider it prudent to retain this requirement in regulation for a further short period.
So yes, she was going to lift the mandatory mask diktat, but changed her mind. So on it goes for the long-suffering Scots, the COVID crisis that never ends. Meanwhile, it has been announced that there'll be a fourth booster rollout for people who are vulnerable and older people, and also we're set soon to try to jab kids as young as 5 to 11-year-olds will be vaccinated against the virus, which is currently in the form of the Omicron variant, which is extremely mild. Why do you need to be vaccinated against that? Let's talk to political and public policy commentator Jason Reed. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Kevin.
Yeah, when will the COVID crisis end? I mean, you know, it does seem that Nicola Sturgeon in particular just wants to deliberately carry it on. What on earth use will it be to make people continue to wear masks on public transport in Scotland? She says, it's because there's been a spike in cases. You know, there's been an increased number of cases of the virus. She's talking about Omicron. Omicron gives you 2 days of the sniffles. Why do we need these ongoing diktats? Why are we still behaving as if we got the bubonic plague amongst us? When is it ever going to end?
It's absolutely incredible. In medical terms, the pandemic effectively ended a long time ago. It stopped being a concern a long time ago because of the Omicron variant being, as you say, so much more mild and the number of deaths going down quite dramatically. But there are so many people in our society, particularly politicians, it seems, who have become addicted to this perpetual fear, to this drip feed of statistics that we were getting every day with the number of infections and the number of cases, the number of deaths and the number of vaccinations and so on, that they just can't let go. And they talk a good game when it comes to living with COVID and rolling back the restrictions and getting back to life as normal. But then when it actually comes down to it, for example, removing mandatory masks, as Nicola Sturgeon said she was going to do, then suddenly they buckle at the last minute. They're unable to give up the power that they've accumulated because they're scared by what seems to be a spike in the graph, a spike in cases. But there will be many more spikes like this for Omicron and for other variants, which are likely to be much more mild. And the scientists and the sage types, they like to say, well, it's possible that another variant will come along that will be so much more deadly that we won't see coming. Well, if and when that does happen, we can confront that when that, we can cross that bridge when we come to it. There's no use at all keeping wildly outdated mask rules in place out of fear for Omicron. It stopped being necessary a long time ago.
And in terms of the potential new variant coming along, you're quite right, Jason. They have warned us that usually variants get increasingly mild. So the next one that does come along, if it does come along, is likely to be even milder than Omicron, which in itself is mild. But there is an outside chance a stronger one could come along. And that's why they say we must continue the vaccine rollout. We must vaccinate children from 11 to 5-year-olds. We must give the fourth booster to the vulnerable and the old. But against what? To protect them from what? It's to protect them from Omicron, which gives you 2 days of the sniffles. Why do 5-year-old kids need to be vaccinated for something that they probably wouldn't even know they had?
The COVID pandemic, I think, has done a huge amount of damage to our ability to think rationally about these kinds of issues. We've completely forgotten what it means to take everyday risk. We all take risks every day just by leaving the house. We all take risks with our health because we don't want to live in some sterilized, reinforced bunker to make sure that we never encounter any virus of any kind. We all take risks every day, and the government has to acknowledge that. But because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we spent so long in lockdown at the behest of SAGE and the scientific and medical advisors, we've forgotten what it means to live normally with very mild viruses such as Omicron. There might be another wave which turns out to be really deadly, and we can confront that when it comes along. There might be some other virus that's not even a coronavirus that comes along. There are all these risks always there in the background, but we cannot live our lives pretending that it's already happened just in case it does.
Yeah. Talking about it just in case, the vaccine rollout, as I said, does continue apace for all sorts of sections of the community. And the justification for this is if a stronger variant comes along, then they will be protected. But in fact, they have no idea whether the current vaccine will be at all effective against a new variant. It could be completely ineffective. So they're asking 5-year-old kids to be vaccinated on the off chance that if a stronger variant comes along, this vaccine will work. You can't vaccinate people, on the off chance that the vaccination they're getting will work. It's ridiculous.
We're trying to plan for a future that doesn't exist. And even if it does exist, exactly as you say, we don't know what the nature of that new variant could or might be. And so it's impossible to create a vaccine in advance to deal with new variants that come along. The growth of the nanny state has been cataclysmic when it comes to the COVID pandemic. It's a good thing that we have vaccines and they're available and lots of people have taken them up. I'm certainly very glad that I was able to be vaccinated. But when did we stop being able to decide for ourselves what medications we need and what vaccinations we need? When did we start needing the nanny state to come out of the woodwork and to tell us this is what you need to do, and if you don't, then you're going to start being, barred from certain sections of society, and we're going to have vaccine passports, and you need to do all this and that in order to retain your most basic rights to leave the house. It's quite understandable and quite human even that politicians who have taken all this power for themselves during the last 2 years, they're now reluctant to give it up. They don't want to go back to normal, where they didn't have the ability to lock down the nation at a push of a button. But we cannot let them continue to hold these things over our heads like this.
No, I mean, I should stress that the government's viewpoint is that the vaccine rollout, such as it is now, is still important. That it will limit the progress of the virus. But I thought the virus has kind of run out of steam anyway. But that's their case. But they do say, if you want to try to solve a mystery, and the mystery here on the table is why are they still vaccinating people when we have a very mild variant called Omicron that doesn't make you very ill? If they say follow the money if you want to solve a mystery like this, and every vaccine costs £28, 28 quid. So somebody's making a lot of money out of this. That could be the reason why this rollout is still being pursued with such vigour.
Quite possibly. I think, to be honest, a lot of it is just to do with this dynamic of politicians just not wanting to give up the power they've accumulated, or being too short-sighted to see when it doesn't even make sense for them to have that power anymore. The Nicola Sturgeon going back on her promise to roll back mask mandates is a perfect example, because the rest of us started deciding for our own sake when to wear a mask and when not to. We all stopped listening to what the government was telling us. It doesn't take much. You only have to look on a train or a bus anywhere in Britain to see lots of people not wearing masks and still being perfectly safe as a result of that, despite what the mandates might say. The mandates have been undermined by mass disobedience for a long time anyway, because we're adults, because we are capable of deciding for ourselves when we need to wear a mask and when we don't. We don't need the nanny state telling us what to do.
Yes, and we don't need Nicola Sturgeon saying there's been a spike in cases. I mean, we're talking about runny noses. It doesn't matter if there's been a spike in cases of people getting runny noses. And as for what comes around the corner next, we don't know yet, and we don't know whether that the current vaccine will work against it. Chances are this virus is going to get milder and milder anyway. So we've got to learn to live with this. And too many people in politics don't seem to want to. So we are now calling for them to get real and to end this crisis. Good to talk to you, Jason. As always, Jason Reed, their political and public policy commentator.